It is time to talk AFC North football, specifically the Cleveland Browns. And that means we welcome in Fred Greetham from 247 Sports and also the OBR. Fred, good to talk to you again.
Hey, Greg. Good to be with you. It's
Special.
football season.
Oh, yeah. No more draft talk and free agency talk and, I don't know, trade talk. It's football game talk after the Browns had a very successful opening win against Cincinnati. And so I have to, let's talk about that, because this is the thing that I find interesting, and I really do believe you see everybody nowadays has these Monday overreaction weekend, overreaction Sunday reports, and I think that's really smart of people to have those, because that's exactly what happens. Just they overreact too much to wins, especially early in the season. And I think the reason they do that early in the season is because of matchups. And Browns have had a good matchup with Cincinnati and Joe Burrow. Throw in the weather conditions, which you could tell Joe Burrow just did. I mean, I've never seen him respond that badly in weather. Now, maybe I'm not a Bengal fan. Maybe it's a thing. But what did you take out of the game, knowing that, well, maybe it was a good matchup for us in the weather, but or was it, you know what? I thought the Browns actually, there's something about this team that you were impressed with more than you thought you were going to see.
Well, yeah, that was the worst game of Burrow's career statistically. Didn't throw for 100 yards. Um, we talked about it a little. I think the last time we were on was after the draft, but I told you, and I've been saying on national shows, and I've been writing it on the OBR, is that the biggest move they made in the offseason, besides getting a lot of good players, is getting Jim Schwartz as defensive coordinator. From the first play, Zadarius Smith was in Burrow's face, and he had no time to throw the whole game. I know the ball slipped a couple times. His longest completion was for 12 yards.
Yeah.
And that's like, well, I don't want to name names, but that's a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL have stat lines like that. And I've heard a lot of excuses for Joe Burrow because of the injury, because of the wet conditions. And then those same people are complaining to me about how poorly Deshaun Watson played in his first game. Well, the Browns won 24-3, and that defense set the tone. And I said it before, they do not, Deshaun Watson, I expect him to be good this year, but he does not have to be elite for the Browns to get to the playoffs. He just needs to be, not lose games for him. Let's not forget Baker Mayfield took him to 11-5 record, 3 years ago. And if you look statistically at Deshaun Watson's career, his first year he tore his ACL. But the other 3 years, his worst year was 26 touchdown passes. That is Baker Mayfield's best year, and that was under Kevin Stefanski in 2020. So if he just played, what would be an average year for Watson, I think they can do well. For the Browns to go to where they want to go, he is going to have to get to an elite level, and I think that's there's time to do that. But you have Nick Chubb, you have a running game that went for over 200 yards, and you have a defense that could be top 10 when it's all said and done. They just need to shave some points and play better than they have in the past.
Yeah, because and you hit it on the head with Zadarius Smith, that acquisition, because that was the one thing that they had to do, was get somebody opposite Myles Garrett to complete the defense, or at least complete it as much as they can. And now, how long term is that? Who knows? But it doesn't have to be very long term, especially, let's just say, if they're going to have a championship season, which is entirely possible. Then 1 year is fine. We'll talk about next year in the offseason. What else did you like about any of the newcomers, any of the free agents, or any
I'll
of the
just say
rookies?
one thing. Yeah, I'll just say one more thing about the pass rush. Everybody was pretty excited in Cleveland when they got Obo Okoronkwo from the Texans. Was like a 3-year kind of a big free
Yes.
agent signing, and up and coming last year. I think he ended the season as like one of the top 10 pass rushers in the NFL as an ascending guy. And now nobody even talks about him. And he's the third guy,
There you
and
go.
he had the first sack. He dropped Burrow, in the second series, and they Jim Schwartz is using all three of them in pass rush situations. I don't know if you saw any of the game. They had Myles Garrett over the center. He went right through like hot knife through butter, a couple times, and they didn't know where he was going to be. But as far as the defensive line, it's the cornerbacks with Ward, Emerson. He has really come on in his second year. If our lads had him rated pretty highly, but nobody else did last year. And the Browns took him in the third round when he was projected a lower.
Yep.
And he's actually probably become at least the second best corner on the team. He really was all over, T. Higgins. T. Higgins had 8 targets and didn't have a catch. And Denzel Ward held Chase Ward to like 39 yards. And, Tyler Boyd had, I think, 2 catches for 10 yards. So it was kind of poor all the way around, for the Bengals receiving group. And I think the cornerbacks, Mike Tomlin of the Steelers actually said he thought the story of the game was the cornerbacks for the Browns. And so the edge rushers get a lot of the credit. They had 10 quarterback hits or hurries on Burrow, but the corners really were like, all over the receivers for the Bengals. There's no room for them to throw it. So, and Grant Delpit, everybody's been waiting for him to emerge. He led the team in tackles, and they were without Juan Thornhill, who was probably the biggest, signing on defense in the secondary, to bring him in from the Chiefs. And he didn't play because of a calf injury. So for Delpit, McLeod, and that entire secondary, I really just think the defense is hard to find fault with.
So speaking of injuries, you mentioned Thornhill did not play. Any other injury concerns heading into the game against Pittsburgh?
Well, I think Thornhill will play. I mean, he was right up a game time decision. So now he has, over a week to get better. Jack Conklin, hard luck, right tackle, Pro Bowl, is out for the season with he tore not only his ACL, but his MCL. And they signed him to an extension at the end of last year. And it was a little curious because they drafted James Hudson, and you thought, why would you pay big money again to Conklin when you have a guy like him that you drafted to take his place? But they signed him to an extension a year out from his injury. He was actually having a good training camp, so it's tough for him. But the unwritten story is DeJuan Jones. They drafted him from Ohio State, and he had a stellar training camp in preseason. I mean, I don't know if he gave up a sack. I know he was going against some lesser guys, but he entered the game against Trey Hendrickson in like 12 minutes to go in the second quarter, early in the game, and he had him, and he was nearly flawless. And so if you can get a 6'8", 374-pound guy that you got in the fourth round because he fell some,
Yep.
if you have him playing and he can do the job, boy, you got quite a find there, the answer. And he's going to baptism by fire. He's going to start against TJ Watt.
Oh, yeah.
He had 3 sacks the other night, but James Hudson played the last couple times the Browns had played the Steelers, and Hudson had really been toasted by Watt. So it'll be interesting, to see if DeJuan Jones, how he fares. It'll be kind of, obviously a big matchup, but it'll be interesting because the kid has played at a big time level, and he seemed undaunted going against Trey Hendrickson the other day and played pretty well. So that's the injury front. I think everybody else will be ready to go.
Okay. And now what about the rookies? You mentioned Jones. Any of the rookies got in any action, or anybody that you maybe expect to play a little bit more this week?
Yeah, I think they had a lot of them that were, inactive, like 4 of them. I think they have 10 rookies on the team.
Okay.
Mohamed Diabate, undrafted from Utah, played on special teams and actually played pretty well. And so did Ronnie Hickman, undrafted from Ohio State. some of the draft choices, other than DeJuan Jones, didn't really play. Luke Whippler was inactive. Cedric Tillman had a little action, but he didn't. I don't think he had any targets. But I expect them to work them in. Tillman might take over the role of David Bell, and move in there, but that's still, probably the fifth receiver. Dorian Thompson Robinson, of course, didn't play, but I think he was the MVP of training
Yep.
camp, just ahead of uh, DeJuan Jones. But I think that he's got a bright future, and they had a lot for what they have at stake this year to trade Josh Dobbs and go into the season with him one snap away from being in the game says a lot.
Yep.
So the rookies really didn't make a big impact in the first game. And the good thing for the Browns is this is one of the first times they've been in a position where they don't need those guys. At the claims after the final cuts, they only claimed one guy, and he was an undrafted rookie cornerback from the Chiefs. And so in the past, they've been claiming guys that they were planning on starting on Sunday, that picking up cast offs.
Yeah.
Now, they are so deep, in a lot of their positions that they don't need these guys. And that's really what they want to do is develop them. I mean, Siaki, Ika, third round pick, defensive tackle, Isaiah McGuire, fourth round pick, edge rusher. They were inactive. And that's a good sign that you didn't really need them, right off the bat, because you can develop them, bring them along. So, yeah, the rookies, probably it's ironic the two undrafted guys outside of DeJuan Jones. Obviously, that's an integral part in the starting, lineup at right tackle, but he wasn't going to play until Conklin went down. So it was good to see, some of the, on the special teams, Ronnie Hickman and Diabate. They even played a little from scrimmage as well.
All right, now the matchup this week. You got another rivalry game going on. That's the way the schedule worked out before the bye in early October, facing all three division opponents. This is going to be the lone one on the road during the stretch. And Pittsburgh coming off an embarrassing loss to a very good San Francisco team. I think a lot of people were surprised about how that game unfolded. It got out of hand really quick after the preseason that Pittsburgh had. They were again. Everybody talks about Tomlin. He's a really good coach. Never under 500. Not even last year with a rookie quarterback and playing Trubisky. So there was a lot of excitement, and then boom, just smacked in the face. Maybe to reality. Who knows? Or again, maybe just a bad matchup. So now Pittsburgh takes on Cleveland. I think Pittsburgh's won 3 out of the last 4. So how has this rivalry been over the last few years, or at least until this? At least until this foundation and coaching staff has been around? How have they fared with the Steelers?
Well, there really hasn't been much of a rivalry. It's been one-sided, almost completely, Pittsburgh's way. In fact, the Browns usually go over to Pittsburgh and find a way to lose. Last year, late in the season, Deshaun Watson really had a struggling game, to close out the season, or I think it was the last game. Yep. And other than that playoff game where they went over there and the game was over before it got started. I think the Browns, jumped ahead like 28-0, from the first play on. It's been a horror chamber for the Browns, kind of like how it's been for the Bengals, against the Browns under Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor. I mean, the Browns are 5-1 against Joe Burrow, and I think 6-1 against Zach Taylor because Burrow didn't play that one game. But as far as, I don't know exactly the numbers. I think the biggest differences this year is I actually, with the opener, felt pretty good with the Browns winning. I didn't expect it to be that decisive, but this game meant more to the Browns than the Bengals. The Bengals seem to have this attitude that we don't start that fast, but we turn it on when we need to. And that's kind of what I felt. The Browns feel like they really need to get off to a good start because 3 division games in the first 4, and nobody is, well, now they have, but in that first game, nobody has seen the Browns defense and how he's going to use them,
Yep,
Jim Schwartz. And
that's
so
right.
now you can see that. But over there in Pittsburgh, I felt that would be the tougher game. Right now, I'm kind of thinking, after seeing the defense, it even exceeded my expectations. I had watched this team from day one. They went to Greenbrier in West Virginia for training camp. And from the first day, that defense has been flying all over the field, and it carried over in the preseason. Even though he didn't use the frontline players, they had second, third team guys sacking the quarterback, causing turnovers just all over the place. And I expected that to carry over, and it did. And I do think the defense can travel, and I think they're going to give Kenny Pickett fits over there. As far as he's gonna be sending Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, Okoronkwo, as well as those guys up the middle, really did a good job clamping down on Joe Mixon and Dalvin Tomlinson and Shelby Harris, so they couldn't run the ball, and Joe Burrow didn't have time, for play to develop. And when you hear Cam Hayward's out, I know they struggled when T.J. Watt went out last year, and I would have to think Cam Hayward means about as much to that defense as T.J. Watt does. I don't know. But if he's out, along with then you have Deontay Johnson, kind of takes away one of your weapons on. I think the defense, though, is going to give Kenny Pickett fits. And I think the Browns will score enough points. So I think they'll be able to go over there and be able to get to a 2-0 start, which would be immense for them because, when you play 6 games in the AFC North, if you can get to 4 wins, usually the team with 4 wins in the division can win the division. That's your quickest way to ensure yourself getting into the playoffs is winning the AFC North. So if you can get out to a 2-0 start, now you put yourself in position, to make a run at the division, even though it's only 2 games in.
Yeah, and that's a really smart way of looking at it because especially going into the bye, to try to take advantage of those division games first and foremost. And I think a lot of people lose sight of it because they think, oh, there's 7 teams make the playoffs and you can get in as a wild card. It's just statistically not the road to a long playoff success. It just isn't, especially when you have aspirations like the Browns do. Sure, they haven't made the postseason in the last couple of years, but this is more like looking like at least the team that we saw during that playoff run in Pittsburgh, winning that playoff game, losing to Kansas City, but giving them a tough game. This looks like that team again, maybe even better because, like you talked about, now the defense looks even. They're older. They look stronger. They have a different approach, of course, and a quarterback now with a lot more experience than they had at that time. So I know it's only 1 game. Again, we don't want to get overboard on it, but this is why when we were doing some shows on this channel regarding making predictions and going over every division, this was a division that we talked about that was like an underrated, tough division. Any of these teams could win the division and it would not be a surprise. Any team can finish in 4th and it wouldn't be a surprise. So that's why it's really important to get off to a good start in the division games.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is, right there, if not the toughest division. It never seems to shake out what you think it's going to be.
Yeah.
But I know across the radar nationally, the Browns were really under the radar.
Yes.
I mean, I saw a prominent ranking before week 1 had them 22nd out of 32 teams. I've seen bad Browns teams that were, at least 22nd, 22 out of 32. And, and I get that there's a dislike nationally for Deshaun Watson. And there also is the Browns is the Browns, kind of what, Jamar Chase was talking last year. They didn't watch or look at these moves under the microscope like maybe I do that watch it every day. Zadarius Smith is a big-time player. Dalvin Tomlinson, Shelby Harris are big-time defensive tackles.
Yes.
And Okoronkwo is pretty strong. Under the radar moves they made after the draft, Zadarius Smith, Shelby Harris and Rodney McLeod. I think Pro Football Focus had him as the seventh best safety last year. They brought him in, and so just on defense, I really think that you haven't seen the best. And like I said, they don't have to be the best defense in the NFL. Last year's defense gave up over 22, 23 points a game. If they could just shave it down to about 20, I think the offense will be able to score enough points to win a lot of those games they lost late last year under Joe Woods. They went into a prevent many times and weren't attacking, and teams came back and beat them. I don't think Jim Schwartz is going to let up. I think he's going to be attacking and aggressive. The biggest things the Browns have is, like any team, health to their key players, but they do have some depth that they haven't had in the past. And so I just think under the radar, they have flown. And the more time goes by, the better for them because, I really think you talk about, I've been doing this over 30 years and I'm pretty objective as far as
Sure.
watching this. And this is the best roster I've ever covered. I mean, top
Yes.
to bottom, and the quarterback is, and I covered Brian Sipe and Bernie Kosar. Those are probably the best two quarterbacks the Browns had. Deshaun Watson is more athletic, can throw when he's on. I mean, I'm relying on his 2020 and
Sure.
before,
Sure.
but I saw that at Greenbrier and in the preseason. I think he's going to be fine. And he adds that mobility to it, even when he's not on throwing. That the other day, that was the difference in the game offensively as he ran for touchdown and 45 yards. So I just think the sky's the limit for this team. I don't know if it'll transfer totally from paper to the field. It did in the first week. Now they just have to keep that going. But nationally, I think eventually it'll wake up that the
Oh yeah.
Browns are pretty formidable. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them start, 2-0 with a win over in Pittsburgh after having so much trouble over there.
Yeah. Are you surprised that they're a 2-point favorite right now, considering all the trouble they've had on the road historically at Pittsburgh, or is that about what you thought it would be?
I think it's out the window. I mean, like you said, they saw a need on defense. And I think Jim Schwartz said, I need some veteran guys. Zadarius Smith, Shelby Harris, Dalvin Tomlinson, Okoronkwo, Rodney McLeod. These guys have brought a different. They like we don't know what you're talking about, but
Yeah.
Juan
Right.
Thornhill, he won a Super Bowl twice with the Chiefs. I think these guys are like, I don't care what happened in the past. We've
Right.
been there, done that, and I'm just saying I look at the matchup. I don't know defense. I know the Steelers have a great defense, but I think the Browns defense will overwhelm more so Pickett than they will than I even thought they did with Burrow. So if they can just, you know, hold him down from going off, I think they have an extremely strong chance. And Nick Chubb's always run well against the Steelers. And now using him out of the backfield, like I've been asking him to do for 3 years, he's a double threat. He was the leading receiver the other day as well as rushed for over 100 yards. So, I mean, they're spreading it out, and the defense has to pick who they're going to go after.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that you have to always take this into consideration, whether it's new coaches, new schemes, and even though Pittsburgh's got the same coaching staff, if you look at it, the one position on their offense that is really kind of new as far as a group is the offensive line. So these guys, a few free agents they brought in, a couple of young guys. So that is something that a team like the Browns, with the type of pressure that they can throw at you, you would think might be able to take advantage of the Steelers the way the 49ers did. So, because Pittsburgh couldn't run the ball, Pickett just was in trouble most of the night. So, yeah. And now, like you said, without Johnson, throw that in there. And this might be a perfect time for Cleveland to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like they have to do it, and now there's a little tape on them, but still, those young guys are going to have to figure out a way. I mean, they brought in Orlando Brown, to go against Miles Garrett, and still, he, you know, closed the game out with a fourth down sack, when the game was on the, still somewhat in doubt.
Sure.
And you're going to have, I've said this, Zadarius Smith and Garrett are two of the only 5 NFL edge rushers who have double digit sacks in the last 5 years in the NFL. And you got two of them on the same team.
Yeah.
So if they're going to double team Myles Garrett, I think
yeah.
Zadarius Smith will eat him alive.
Yeah.
And well, that Okoronkwo isn't too bad himself. So I just think that Jim Schwartz is going to really, he's been around enough to throw things at Pickett that he might really someday be a good quarterback, but he hasn't seen it all. He doesn't have the experience. And, if you can, the thing that would slow that down would be Najee Harris, but they do have run stoppers now. They held the Bengals, down, 50, 60 yards rushing the other day. So, I think this is a different Browns defense than what they've seen before.
All right, Fred, great job. I appreciate it as always. This is off to a good start, and if the Browns continue to play that kind of football this year, then hopefully we'll talk a few more times, and I look forward to that. Also, want to let everybody know in the description area we're going to have links of where to check out your reports. Do you have anything specific that you're working on or that you worked on for this past weekend that Browns fans can look forward to?
Yeah, if they look to the OBR.com or they go to my Twitter or X, whatever it's called, at Fred Greetham 9, I lay out a 3-part series. It's right pinned at the bottom of my profile. It's free, on how the Browns can get to the playoffs, the 3 keys to this year. So it's a pretty good read, I think. Kind of laid out some of the things we talked about here.
All right, and Fred, are you on? Do you do a weekly show, or how does that work?
I do. Yeah, if you go to YouTube or Twitch, either of those, Wednesday night live at 7 p.m. on the OBR.com, or you go to our website, theobr.com, just click it and follow you there. But it's on YouTube live as well as Twitch. And if you can't be there Wednesday at 7, you can get them on. Just go to YouTube at the OBR channel.
Perfect.
The Orange and Brown Report.
And we're going to put a link in the description area for that as well. So if you've watched this video this long, then go ahead and check it out as soon as you're done. Because we're done here. So check that out. And Fred, as I said, we look forward to talking to you again, hopefully sometime later on this season.
Sounds good, Greg. Thanks for having me. Always good to talk to you.